Hello and welcome to the Brutal Iron Gym podcast, where our goal is to cut through the BS and deliver the brutal truth about topics related to health and happiness. Today's topic is training, and the title is Economy of Effort. So we've talked a little bit about the concept of trying to get the most bang for your buck. We've talked about that actually already a little bit in podcasts before, but I wanted to touch on it, especially again given the fact that it's the new year and pretty much everyone makes these mistakes. So even people who've been lifting for a year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, I can still see people not selecting the best exercise for the purpose that they want. Now, have I been there before? Absolutely. So I'm 20 years into lifting. So I've been lifting now for 20 years. I've been personal training for 18 years. So I've just been further ahead along in like all of the mistakes. So I made all the same mistakes I see people making now. It's just I continue to learn and educate myself and continue to move past them. And I would like to use like a moment like this podcast to get people to move past their mistakes faster. So learn from my mistakes, not having to make all of them yourself. So for example, there was a guy in the gym last night. I was watching what he was doing for warm-ups related to squats and just some techniques and concepts he was using. And I remember doing certain of these things like 5, 10 years ago, and it just struck me as it was funny, the kind of the sequencing where I could look at that person doing something I used to do 10 years ago, but then realized and found out and researched that it wasn't the best thing to do. I can look at another person doing something in the gym, something I was doing maybe 5 or 10 years ago. Then again, it kind of sort of made sense at the time, but now it doesn't. And once you like practice it and use it enough, there's kind of pros and cons. So there are always kind of pros and cons to everything in the sense, well, I guess not everything. So, but in the training world, there's debates on certain topics. So, for example, there is a device sold that helps kind of hold the shoulders back in place. It helps perform scapular retraction, meaning it helps pull your shoulder blades back and together. So, and some people will wear that when they squat. And I actually am a big proponent of not doing that. So it's kind of that concept of if I wear something that's going to hold me in place, well, then when that something is gone, have I really developed the muscles that will then hold me in place? So just because I could put myself into that position with that device doesn't mean I can put myself into that position without that device. So I think certain things like shoulder braces are maybe good for kind of warm-ups or stretching or kind of getting the body aware to certain positions, maybe physical therapy, rehab, things like that. But I don't really believe that you should be wearing that stuff on a regular basis because it just causes the musculature of that area to be lazy and it won't fully develop because it has the aid of that device. So that would be one example as a person was squatting with this thing on their body, and I'm just looking at it going, it's such a freaking waste of time. This person, for example, they have their upper back rounds when they squat. I've actually talked about this person before. But their upper back rounds when they squat because their upper back's the strongest part of them. So they have weak legs, they have weak thighs, weak glutes. So when their body struggles in a squat or a deadlift, it wants to pull its hips closer to the linear center point of gravity under the barbell. So for example, in a squat, if his hips stay back, then his hips have to take the load of the weight. If he rounds his upper back and pulls his hips further underneath himself, putting it closer to underneath the barbell, then that actually reduces the amount of weight load into the hips and increases the weight load into the upper back. So his body is actually bending to take weight away from the hips, not because he has a weak upper back. So I've talked about this before, is he does a whole bunch of exercises to strengthen his upper back, which is absolutely stupid because it's already the strongest part of him. And in the last year and some of his training, he hasn't really made any significant increases because he keeps training the strongest thing, not the weakest things. And then the other day he's squatting with this stupid shoulder harness on, and it's like, dang it, anyhow, again, it's not your upper back, man. Stop targeting your upper back. So I've watched this stuff happen, and even in my gym, which is a pretty well-educated gym, in the sense that We have the free weight areas are always busy. We have pretty complex machines that people still use, but they're busy with them. So our general education level of exercise is higher than most other gyms, and that makes sense because we are a specialized gym. So, but even within a specialized crowd, like an educated crowd, there's still those kind of mistakes that are happening in training. So I see this, and this person's, for example, been lifting for years. So even though we've covered this in past podcasts, I still think there's value to covering it again because people still make these mistakes. So let's try to learn and see if we can get away from these mistakes faster by having some education on it. So in podcast 415, titled Layering Purposes, How to Best Kill Birds. And that has to do with the fact of like killing two birds with one stone. So how do I get as many benefits out of a singular exercise? So that podcast talks about kind of the economy of effort. How do I get more for my efforts? Now, we also have podcast 433 and 437 that both deal with exercise selection. So those are actually trainer education podcasts, I believe, but they have to do with exercise selection, which again just kind of gives reasoning to why you would pick certain exercises over others. So we have some information, but I wanted to go through and kind of give an example of just some more information based on how beneficial it can be to finding the exact right exercise for all of your intended purposes. So that way we can get the most for our efforts. Now, this does often require that you have to put in more effort. So you have to try harder at things that are more important. Doesn't mean you have to be in the gym longer. The information we're presenting here actually would make it where you didn't have to be in the gym longer at all. You'd actually be able to be in the gym less. So when we're in the gym, what we're really doing is we're creating the stimulus for change. Once that stimulus is produced, we're done. We go home, we eat, we sleep, and our body makes adaptations. The only thing you could argue against that would be like if somebody's working on the technique of something. So if they want to get better at the technique of squat, then being in the gym enough to practice lots of squats is a good idea. Okay, whether that's the amount of time per session or the frequency of session. But in general, when we're trying to create muscular damage for fat loss, for muscle shape, muscle size, most adaptations we want for our body, we really just need to do whatever we need to do in the gym and then get the hell out. Because it's when we sleep, it's when we eat that our body makes those changes. So, I want to give an example of kind of a workout structure that I have one of my clients doing right now, and just kind of explain about the rationale or the reasoning behind what we're doing with these selections, and then just kind of bringing it back towards you guys at the end of the podcast. So, for the person here, one of their workouts is for squats. This person is a power lifter, meaning they want to get better at strength of squats, but they also want aesthetics. So this is a person who does kind of dual sport. They do powerlifting and they do aesthetic training. So they want to do physique style competitions as well as the training. So what we have them doing is always a mixture of things that make them stronger, things that also make them have better shape, things that grow the weakest or kind of the underdeveloped areas that they have. And we also have a high volume of workload, so that way, with also proper timing of that workload, so that way they're getting kind of a high intensity interval training stimulus out of their resistance training. So we're actually getting like a cardiovascular health effect, a fat loss effect, and kind of a caloric burn effect from their weight training, where we don't need to go on cardio equipment and do like boring ass treadmill stuff and all that stuff. So their warm-up is performing the rower, so CrossFit 2 rower, and it's a normal style of rowing. So we have a special device on our rower that we actually sell if you're ever interested. It's a device that you can connect to your rower. It just takes place of the current connection, but you can then put on any handle you want. So sometimes we'll put on D-ring handles, we'll do one-arm rows, we'll do rotational exercises for the core. There's a lot of different stuff we do. especially postural based stuff, to improve people's upper back strength and postural awareness. So it can be used as a form of kind of physical therapy, physical development in that way. So the quick connect, it just connects one handle out for another, but it allows us to put on a lot of different handles and we can do a lot of different movements. So the benefit of using a rower, for example, versus a weight stack or a band is that there's no weighted eccentric. So especially for some of my physical therapy clients, we don't want to build up any inflammation in the joints associated with the movement, but we want a muscular contraction stimulus. So by having it be a weighted contraction but an unweighted eccentric, we don't accumulate a lot of inflammation, but we get a lot of repetitions on the awareness and on the muscular contraction aspect. So there's tons of value to using something like a rower that is a weighted contraction, unweighted eccentric. So the rower, they get on the rower, they do 2 minutes. 1 minute is kind of a good medium pace, and then the second minute is high flying as fast as they can go, trying to rip the machine apart. Then they get into kettlebell swings, but we do them with a slight knee bend and more so focusing on a hip bend. So these are actually called hip hinge swings. So kettlebell hip hinge swings. Now, if you're curious about this, you can search that. If you can't find a good video, email us and I'll send you the video that I send with clients programming. So when we write programming for clients, we always include videos for all of the exercises, so that way they can see how it should be done and make sure they get better technique out of the movement and get the better bang for the buck. So if you would like the link for any of the exercises I'm going to name here, just shoot us an email and I'll send that to you. So they do kettlebell hip hinge swings, followed by kettlebell squat stance deadlifts. So what this is it's a deadlift specific to their squat stance. So they're not going to stand wide-footed like a sumo deadlift because we're not trying to warm up a deadlift mechanic. We're trying to warm up a squat mechanic. Therefore, they're going to do squat stance, and they're going to mimic the same kind of body positioning of their squats. So in sync with today's podcast, we're actually going to be sharing on our social media pages on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter under Brutal Iron Gym. We're going to be sharing this exercise. So you'll see me actually explain this exercise and kind of have like a video of it, and you guys can mimic it or try it if you'd like. So that's their warm-up. They do rounds of rower for 2 minutes, 1 minute medium paced, 1 minute high paced. Then they go right into kettlebell swings for 20 reps. Then they go right into kettlebell squat stance deadlifts for 10 reps. They do 3 rounds of that with very minimal rest. So I typically like them to try to repeat and keep moving with less than 1 minute rest in between the rounds. So the idea of the warm-ups is that by having it be aggressive, meaning like there's not a lot of rest period, it starts that kind of high intensity interval training effect in the cardiovascular response. So their heart rate actually goes up during the exercises. Then during that 1 minute kind of rest period while they're getting their feet back into the rower, the heart rate starts to come back down. But then all of a sudden we're right back into the next round, the heart rate has to come back up. So if the body, when it's working to get the heart rate up, it burns more calories and has more stress on the body than once the heart rate is already up and then just stays high. So if you build from a heart rate level of say 5 to 10, okay, and I'm just making up numbers, and that the building of 5 to 10 takes a lot of effort and stress out of the body. But to just stay at 10 actually requires less stress. This sounds odd, and there are, I used to teach exercise physiology at the local university, and I did it for 7 years. So there's a lot of science behind what I just said, and it would be hard to explain all of that very quickly. However, we kind of know this is that if once I get running, it's easier for me to stay running than it would be for me to start a sprint. So if I told you I want to start from a dead stop and I want you to start your sprint until you get to your top end speed, then I want you to slow down, then start back up, try to go to your top end speed. Once you get to your top end speed, you immediately slow down again, back to a stop. Then you start again. That would be horrible, right? That'd be very annoying. Whereas if we just did one start, and then once we're at top end speed, we just kind of carry momentum and keep going. So this is the same kind of concept we're doing with the heart rate, is we're getting the heart rate to build up, then we're letting it come back down, build back up, let it come down, build back up, and it annoys the shit out of the cardiovascular system, which is great for us because it burns a lot of calories. It stresses the system, which then with proper food and sleep, our body comes back with a new improved system. So this actually, in this warm-up, even though we're using a rower, kettlebell swings, and kettlebell squat stance deadlifts, we're actually getting cardiovascular benefit. Just like somebody would think they would need to do on a treadmill or elliptical or step mill, you can actually do this with weights. So the benefit of this is we're getting a lot of kind of cardiovascular benefit right away. We're getting a lot of blood flow to the joints to help warm up the joints associated with the squat. We're also getting their endorphins and adrenaline up. Adrenaline is kind of like aggressiveness, so we're getting them ready and prepared so when they go into their squats, they're already freaking like fired up and ready to go. Endorphins are natural painkillers, so by the time they get to their squats after the warm-up, they're already going to be kind of ready to go. They're not going to feel any small aches and pains. Their body's already awake and primed and ready to go for the day. So there's tons of benefits to that. And then also within the kettlebell squat stance deadlift, they're actually working on their squat technique. So they have within their technique the need to push their hips back while they're pushing their knees out towards their pinky toes. That way they maximally engage their glutes and hamstrings, especially their adductors. And it also, they have to focus on maintaining a neutral hip position, neutral hip, where they have to keep their psoas accounted for. So that way the hips don't dump forward to try to find bracing stability by letting the front of the pelvis kind of touch into the top of the quad kind of area. So we want to keep their belly button pulled inward in more of a neutral spine, so that way they can properly load into the hamstrings and glutes and not over stress or under utilize the muscles and joints of the hip by having improper hip position. So their warm-up does all of that. Then when they get to barbell squats, they then will include walking lunges during their warm-ups. So they're going to do the bar for, say, 5 to 10 reps. They're going to do bodyweight walking lunges for 20 steps. They put a little bit more weight on the bar. Maybe they go up to 95 pounds. Then they're going to do walking lunges again for 20 steps. They then go up to 135 pounds in the squat with walking lunges, 185 with walking lunges, 225 with walking lunges. So they get 3 to 4 sets of walking lunges in between their squats. This helps kind of unilateral awareness, so they can wake up one leg versus the other. So when they squat, they can feel if they're balancing one leg better versus the other. Make sure they're not loading into the strong leg. Make sure they're always using both legs. It also helps kind of pull open any tight tissues. So in the warm-up, why we have kettlebell swings before our squat stance deadlifts is swings help pull open the hamstring connection at the hip, which is often an area where people are tight, and that causes lower back rounding. So by doing the swings before the squat stance deadlifts, it helps to open up that upper area of the hamstring. So whenever they try to mimic their squats with the kettlebell squat stance deadlift, they can better stretch into their hamstrings because their hamstrings are already pulled open and kind of like loose and ready to go. That also further compounds, so that way by the time they get to squats, their hamstrings and adductors are fully warmed up, fully kind of pliable and full range of motion available. So the walking lunges help ensure also that other little nitty-gritty small muscles of the groin and hamstrings and hips and whatnot are all fully opened and ready to go for the squat. So by doing that specific warm-up and by doing walking lunges between their warm-up for the squats, they're actually improving their technique immensely before they ever even get under the barbell, because they're ensuring proper movement of their body mechanics. So this is actually considered movement therapy or movement preparation work. So then when they get into their squats, before their first working set, we do what's called a heavy walkout hold. So they walk out with their 1 rep max on their back on the bar. They're not going to try to squat it, but they're going to unrack it, walk back, stand in place for 10 seconds, walk it back in. What this does is it helps kind of like feel like, oh shit, that is really heavy. And it kind of wakes up their nervous system. We get another spike of adrenaline and endorphins. Okay, another spike of aggression and natural painkillers, and it forces their core muscles to really brace very hard, and it kind of wakes up the muscles of the positioning of bracing and supporting a squat. So that way, when they go into their first working sets, all those muscles are already fired up and ready to go. So they then do their squat work, And then afterwards, they do another walkout hold before they unrack the bar. And again, that's just so that way they can get used to heavier weight loads. So that way they don't always feel shocked when they go heavy because they always pick up something heavy every time they train. So that's a quick example of just their warm-up and what we have based around their squat work. There is infinitely more involved in the rest of their workout. So in their accessory work, they have unilateral work. They have 2 units of glute and hamstring work to 1 unit of quad work because they're imbalanced. Their quads are too dominant. So we flip the kind of dominance factor in their accessory work and make sure we train their underdeveloped muscles more than developed ones. And we also still have timed ratios of work to rest. Kind of rest periods, so that way we further continue that cardiovascular health and benefit effect. So, excuse me. That helps a ton because all of the layers of these purposes, it makes sure that when they go through their workout, they're getting every single freaking ounce of whatever's available to them, so that way they can get the best results possible. So, if you think about what you're doing in your own training, what purposes does everything you're doing have? Do you have 2 exercises that just kind of repeat the same thing? Is that really necessary? Maybe you're kind of wasting time by doing 2 of them whenever one of them would work fine. Maybe you can think about the exercises you're doing. Does it have multiple reasons? And also, do they have layered reasons where one component builds into the next component? So like we said with our warm-up, we have hip hinge swings, which help loosen the hamstrings, which improves the squat stance deadlift, which mimics their squat technique, which then improves their squat. So there's layers and layers and kind of cascading effects in the training. Do you have that in yours? Does what you do have multiple reasons? Does it have compounding beneficial reasons? Okay? So think about that, is out of the energy and time that you're putting into your training, what are you getting from it? So are you getting the most you can for your efforts? Or are you just getting kind of mediocre results for your efforts? And you can also ask yourself, are you even just putting in mediocre efforts? So we talk about muscle cardio all the time. So I think that's podcast number 30. We talk about the benefits of muscle cardio, which is using your muscles to do cardio rather than just boring treadmill and elliptical and step mill stuff. So those things have their place, but they're not anywhere near as beneficial to burning calories as weight training is. So if you can weight train with proper rest periods, you will burn more calories, okay, during the time in which you're exercising and during the recovery phase after that exercise. So it is harder to lift weights with a fast pace than it is to walk on a treadmill, but you're going to get more results for the time that you're spending doing it. So think about what balance you want to have of effort and time versus the results. Do you want to put in a little bit of effort into a lot of time and get a little bit of results for it? No, it doesn't sound very fun. So I might do something easy for an hour, but I'm going to get maybe a level 3 out of 10 results from it. Where if I did something hard for 30 minutes, I get 10 out of 10. So if you think about the economy of effort, if you think about what you're doing, does it have multiple purposes? Does it have compounding effects? Am I picking the best exercise to address multiple needs? You will get more results for the time you're putting towards your training, and you'll get more results if you increase your effort within that same time. So, think about that in your training. What balance are you getting? What balance do you want? Do you want to train really freaking hard and get every ounce of effort results out of that effort? Yes, it's possible. You just have to layer your stuff, okay? So you can use the information from today's podcast, use the information from podcast 415, Layering Purposes, How to Best Kill Birds, and use the information from podcast 433 and 437, which are exercise selection podcasts. So you have to decide, am I doing the best of what I think I'm doing? Am I getting the most for what I'm doing? So analyze it. Look at what your progress is. So are you getting stronger if your goal is strength? Are you getting bigger muscles if your goal is bigger muscles? Are you losing weight if your goal is losing weight? What is your goal, and are you reaching it? Are you getting better results towards it? Okay? If you're getting some results, could you possibly be getting better? That's the idea. It's just to raise some awareness and ask yourself, does what I'm doing sound like what he's talking about? Where everything has purposes, everything has layers, everything builds on itself. Okay? So if you have any questions about your training, email us. Our email is brutaliron@gmail.com. So if you have some questions, if you want to know if something's a good exercise, just shoot us an email and we'll help you out. Okay? If you want help with programming to kind of make sure you're getting the best bang for your buck, of course, we'll help you with that. So if you listen to today and you think, okay, I really want to apply this, I want to get the best for this, think through what you're doing and ask yourself, what purposes does this cover? If it's only one, it's probably not the best exercise to select. Try to layer your purposes. Okay? Cool. So if you need anything, email us at brutalirongym@gmail.com. We're always happy to help. And thank you for listening. Okay? So if you like the podcast, please share it with family and friends. The more people we help, the happier the world will be. Also, if you like this information, you can find more from us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, Brutal Iron Gym. And if you have any questions, feedback, or suggestions, we'd love to hear from you. This podcast is for you, so we want to know what you want to learn about. You can tell us at our email at brutalirongym@gmail.com. As always, I hope this was helpful. And thank you for listening. And thank you for watching.